Welcome to another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I am your host, Graham Hall, joined by my co-host, Jacob Rudner, and we are here to talk a multitude of Florida topics as the Gators prepare for a homecoming matchup Saturday at 7:45 p.m. against the Kentucky Wildcats. But first, we got to start with the most disappointing news, and that is in the 23-17 overtime loss to the Tennessee Volunteers nearly a week ago. The Gators once again had a season-ending injury to quarterback Graham Mertz. He went down on a 3rd and 6 play, maintained and stayed in the game, as he did last year when he suffered that non-displaced collarbone injury. He stayed in the game, threw a touchdown pass to Arliss Boardingham before realizing that something was not right, and now it's been revealed that Mertz will miss the remainder of the season, and his collegiate career is now over after suffering a torn ACL to the Volunteers. Just, Jacob, how disappointing is it for Mertz in your mind, given that, everything that he's meant to the Florida program from his buy-in, but also he's not really going anywhere. You're going to see him stick around on the sidelines. He said he wanted to dress out in a jersey for this upcoming game, and he's going to kind of take this pseudo player coach role that we've seen previous players take. How impactful is that for Florida, especially turning to a freshman quarterback, which we're going to discuss here in a little bit? And just how disappointing also in your mind is it that once again, Graham Mertz, who has been very efficient, not just this season, but last year, has seen his Florida season cut short for the second consecutive year?
Yeah, I can start with the disappointment because the answer there is clear. I think that it's tremendously disappointing. This is a quarterback who returned to Florida to exhaust his collegiate eligibility in order to help the team win. He's expressed effectively at every opportunity that he loves Florida. He wanted Florida to succeed. He wanted Billy Napier to succeed. And he wanted to win with this program. And that was something that never really came to fruition for him. He missed the game earlier this season due to the concussion. And now again, is hurt and will miss the remainder of the year. So, this season unfolded very far, I think, from what the expectations were for Mertz. Maybe not the most naturally gifted quarterback like the guy who's going to replace him, DJ Lagway, but certainly somebody who gives 100% effort at all times and really does care not only about his own success, but really the success of the team. And that's been abundantly clear throughout his time in Gainesville. So on that end, emotionally, it's very disappointing. I think there is an element, though. Billy Napier said this, and I don't always agree. For those of you who listen to the podcast, you know this. I don't always agree with what Billy Napier has to say, but this time I really do. There could be a galvanizing element to Graham Mertz's injury. I think that this is a guy who was really, kind of the rallying point for this team. He knew how to capture the attention of guys on both sides of the ball. They didn't just need to be his offensive teammates. And now he is going to be around and very active. He'll be in team meetings. He already has been. He's going to undergo surgery next week, but as soon as he's able, the expectation is that he will be on the sidelines during games or in a box. He will be in the quarterback room to help DJ Lagway continue to process things and advance his career forward and doing his part to try and keep Florida afloat in the wake of a very significant injury. So, listen, is it ideal for Florida? No, far from. But I do think that there is a way that Florida can make this as positive as possible. And one of the steps that needs to be taken for that to happen is for Mertz to stay involved. From everything we've been told by Mertz himself and Billy Napier, that is, of course, the plan. And Florida will now have to just kind of manage it as such. They need Graham Mertz to stick around in the fold and maintain his emotional veteran presence, not just for guys like DJ Lagway, but for everybody on the team who kind of looked up to him and viewed him as that leader. And then the other thing is that I do think that Mertz will bring something to the table in terms of helping out with game prep and making sure that guys like DJ Lagway are as prepared as they can possibly be to go and step into these larger roles, because he is very good at that kind of stuff. I think if there's been one thing that stood out about Graham Mertz throughout his time at Florida, it's that he does prepare very well. He does take advantage of the things that occur off the field in order to put himself in the most advantageous positions on the field. So he can continue to help Florida's other quarterbacks do exactly that. This is a smart guy, very mature quarterback, and Florida will try its best to take advantage of that, even though it can't have him on the field.
Yeah, I wrote on Sunday that Graham Mertz deserves to be commended for how he spent the nearly 2 years here in Gainesville. He was a guy who not many people thought would be the ideal choice when Florida went to go get a transfer portal quarterback after Anthony Richardson declared for the NFL draft. Florida's coaching staff evaluated more than 20 signal callers before identifying Mertz, and he stepped into a leadership role almost from the jump, said all the right things. Like you said, has really provided a spark and a source of inspiration for a lot of people within this program, and that had continued throughout the week. Billy Napier noted that he has been at every team event. Despite his injury, he walked into the Florida football facility on Monday with a smile on his face. He's not sulking. He's still looking to do whatever he can to aid this team moving forward. And like I said, that deserves just a ton of respect, because time and time again, we've seen a player suffer a disappointing injury and their focus becomes on their own personal concerns, and rightfully so. I can't blame them for thinking that, especially for a guy like Graham Mertz, who I don't know what his professional aspirations were, but whatever he wants to do, whether it's coaching, attempting to make it to the NFL, he's going to give it his all. And knowing that ladder is the injury is going to keep him out throughout the pre-draft process and through the 2025 NFL draft, you got to think that has certainly hindered those opportunities that he's going to have to maybe catch on with some team and make a positive impression for whatever team is out there. So I couldn't have blamed him if he was very down after another season-ending injury. But from all, everything we've heard, that's not been the case. So I do think he deserves a ton of respect for how he's approached this injury, which is certainly not an insignificant one whatsoever. I also think, you mentioned Graham Mertz suffering that concussion in the season opener. One of the few, I think, bright spots of this situation is that injury, and then, getting a start against the Samford game for DJ Lagway. DJ's not coming in as this fresh-faced freshman anymore. He really has had a chance in each game to factor into the game plan to aid Florida's offense in whatever way, which has changed on a week-to-week basis, whichever way Florida's coaching staff decides is necessary. And then he entered that Tennessee contest there and led them to a tie, got to overtime. This is a guy who, like you said, has very high expectations, but again, still a freshman here. And now defenses have a chance to key in on him the rest of the way here, which maybe is going to change some of his effectiveness, knowing that there's a daunting slate ahead here for the final month of the season. And Billy Napier noted that we've seen this situation before. When you look at the drop-off at quarterback now behind DJ Lagway, it could affect the play calling decisions. Are you going to be using this guy's athleticism at a high rate, knowing that if he gets an injury, you have to turn to Aiden Warner, a guy who transferred in as a preferred walk-on from Yale. You have Clay Millen presumably behind him. I was a little bit surprised to hear Napier say that Aiden Warner would be the backup quarterback over Millen, a guy who has started at two previous schools, started 10 games in his career before joining Florida. I was a little bit surprised to hear that Warner was the backup. So you see a little bit of, I think, a little bit of uncertainty in terms of effectiveness of the quarterback position behind DJ Lagway. How much do you think that is going to impact the play calling here and how Florida is going to look to use Lagway, knowing that they can't afford to suffer another injury at the signal caller position, or else the optimism is going to decrease even more significantly if you lose your freshman former five-star signee at quarterback? Do you think that's going to be something that Florida is going to have to heavily weigh moving forward, starting with Saturday's contest against Kentucky?
There's no question about that. Florida cannot afford another injury at quarterback, because then you do start to dip into an area of your depth chart that is going to get very uncomfortable. Aiden Warner may have performed well in practices. That seems to be kind of the prevailing word on the street right now, is that this is a guy who's really stepped up. He came from Yale, smart kid, and does a good job in his role as a third-string quarterback. But the reality is that he is a significant step back from Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway, and Florida's offense would effectively be crippled if it has to continue to dip into its quarterbacking depth chart. So this situation is very reminiscent of that 2022 situation that Florida had, where Anthony Richardson is the starting quarterback. Florida doesn't feel great about its depth behind him. Jack Miller and Jalen Kitna were the backup quarterbacks at the time. Miller was dealing with a pretty significant thumb injury that kept him out for the vast majority of the year. And so Billy Napier said at the time, and has now kind of reiterated, yeah, we had to be pretty careful with our offensive play calling because we couldn't leave this guy in positions where he could get hurt because we didn't have the adequate depth to afford such an injury with so much season left. I think this is identical. Florida cannot afford to put DJ Lagway in situations that could jeopardize his health. It will need him to slide. There is a limit on how much he can show off his athleticism in these situations, purely because they cannot afford another quarterback injury. And DJ Lagway is the last guy on the depth chart, I think, that can leave coaches and teammates and maybe even fans feeling comfortable, even to some degree. I'm not saying that anybody should feel good about the state of Florida football right now. That's not my argument whatsoever. However, I do think that having DJ Lagway under center is a heck of a lot more comfortable than having Clay Millen or Aiden Warner in that situation. And it's no disrespect to those guys, but, this is how football works. These depth charts are the way that they are for a reason, and Florida does need to be able to put itself in a position to succeed. Having Aiden Warner taking full-time snaps is not the way to do that. So to answer your question, yes, they're going to have to be careful. And in addition to the play calling having an element of caution to it, I think there needs to be, and probably already has been, a conversation between, Ryan O'Hara and DJ Lagway, or Billy Napier and DJ Lagway, that basically lays it out simply. You cannot take big risks with your body right now. You need to be a pocket passer. You can use your athleticism to extend plays. But when it comes to, getting past the line of scrimmage and using your legs, you must get down. You cannot take hits. And we need to be very cautious in terms of how we deploy certain elements of the game in order to keep this freshman quarterback, who really is the last kind of lifeline for this football team this season, as healthy as he can possibly be, just given Graham Mertz is not coming back.
Yeah, it's kind of a peculiar situation here because you have a Florida offense that has not been fantastic when it comes to explosive plays. And the rest of the way, you can make an argument easily that they're going to need to do everything they possibly can to stay in a lot of these contests. Yeah, the defense has improved here, and certainly against Tennessee gave them a shot at winning the game, especially if they were able to execute at a higher rate there in the first half. But a freshman quarterback who comes in and has always been able to impact the game positively from an athleticism standpoint, obviously tore it up there at Willis with more than 60 touchdowns. He's always been one of the best athletes on the field here, and getting him to realize when to give up on a play, whether it's to slide or throw it away, is absolutely something that comes down to his continued progression as a collegiate quarterback. So drilling that into Lagway with a kind of a short time frame to do that, with just a week removed from Graham Mertz's injury, is absolutely an aspect of this game that I am keen on seeing, because like you said, they can't afford to lose Lagway the rest of the way, or else the offensive opportunities and its ceiling are going to significantly decline here. So this is quite an interesting situation here. And to be quite frank, this outcome is going to be, I think, a very impactful one on the state of the Florida football program, which we're going to talk about now here. From everything we've gathered, that Tennessee loss didn't just, be a devastating one for the Florida fan base. It really kind of, not to say expedited a decision here, but it really, I think, gave the Florida athletic department a little bit more of this is a timeline that could change every 24 hours here, especially with each outcome the rest of the way. I know that Florida has a daunting final month of the season here, but this is a very winnable game. And if coaching mishaps and poor execution and head-scratching decisions, alignment issues, special teams mistakes, whatever it is, if those things continue to rear their ugly head, this could be a catalyst in a sense here for Florida expediting the timeline in parting ways with head coach Billy Napier, especially when you head into a bye week. And there's always an argument that if you're going to make a change here, do it in a bye week to give the interim head coach as much of an opportunity as possible to settle in, acclimate with the players so they understand the process a little bit more, and just have extended preparation before you go into a game, especially, like I said, a very, very incredibly daunting final 5-game stretch for Florida, where they'll have to play Georgia, at Texas, LSU at home, Ole Miss, and at Tallahassee against Florida State to end the season here. this could be absolutely one that if Florida loses to Kentucky for the third straight time in the Billy Napier era, that it could spell the end of the Billy Napier era in Gainesville before the third season is over. Do you agree with that assessment from everything we've gathered, that this is going to be something that they are going to continue to evaluate, and that one more loss could be the final one for head coach Billy Napier here in Gainesville?
Listen, I think that one thing I go back to is after week 3, when Florida lost at home to Texas A&M in kind of blowout, embarrassing fashion, I had written a story that I thought it was time for Florida to move on from head coach Billy Napier. And quite frankly, my sentiment hasn't changed whatsoever in the time since then. But the reason I bring that up is because I think that that is the case a lot more broadly than just my opinion or what you and I have talked about, over at swamp247.com on the message board, where we're discussing these kinds of things constantly, or, on this podcast where we've talked about it before as well. I do get the sense, based on my conversations with sources, that that's kind of the prevailing conversation behind the scenes as well, is that it's a matter of when, not if, Billy Napier will be fired. And I do think that the Tennessee loss and the way that it went down might have added some accelerant to the explosion here. I think that that was a loss that many people viewed in their evaluation of it as coaching, a coaching-induced defeat. Billy Napier made what I thought were several critical errors, and we've talked about them extensively, and I don't need to go back into it too much, but a timeout on a dead ball with a minute left in the first half was egregious. Billy Napier himself in 2022, when Florida played at Tennessee, said, if you are a 2-touchdown underdog on the road and you have a chance to win the game in regulation, you go for 2. And what did he do? He kicked the field goal. So this guy has gone, in his actions have flown in the face of his own words. It's not our assessment, Graham, that I think Billy Napier is going against, and it shouldn't be. What you and I think at the end of the day doesn't matter. I think it comes down to what the coach himself is saying. And Billy Napier, dating back to the start of the 2022 season, has said a lot of things. And in my view of it, they've either not come true, or he has done the exact opposite of his own guidance. I thought what he said in 2022 about 2-point conversions on the road as an underdog was wise. Of course you should go for 2 when you're a 2-touchdown underdog and you have a chance to put the game away. And, to the people who are saying, well, you'd be griping about it if he went for 2 and didn't get it. No, I completely disagree. Florida should never have even had an opportunity, in my opinion, to win that game on the road. This is not a team, in my mind, equipped to compete with top 10 opponents in the country. They did a phenomenal job on defense, keeping Tennessee at bay. Their offense was not great, but it certainly did enough. I mean, we can talk about mistakes that were made on offense, but at the end of the day, that game was tied at the very end, and Florida did have a chance to win, and they didn't do it. So, the lack of aggression is jarring to me, and I think all of that is to be said, that we've reached a point in the Billy Napier tenure where those who are movers and shakers in the Florida realm, whether that's people who work directly for Florida's athletic department, whether it's the people who are donating significant amounts of money annually in order to keep the athletic department afloat in this NIL era, I think that the consensus at the moment is that this tenure is beyond saving. I think that Billy Napier has worked Florida to a position where they are not showing progress. I think that we see some progress, but we see symptoms of progress, and then a lot of the same underlying problems. Florida hasn't really cured the disease. It's fixed symptoms. And so I think that we've reached a point, Graham, where the change is necessary. Do I think that it could happen after another loss? Absolutely. I think that it could have happened, several losses ago. Do I think that there's also a possibility that Florida looks at the situation and goes, we don't benefit necessarily from firing Billy Napier right now, and it doesn't actually make a material change to our future, whether he's fired after a loss to Kentucky versus getting him through the regular season and announcing somewhere that there will be a change and that Florida anticipates a coaching search? Maybe that's a thought, and maybe it doesn't make a difference. But I do think that we're reaching a point where their precedent needs to become a factor here. And the precedent is at the University of Florida that if you are not an adequate game coach and you cannot get your team to win games, all the things that are said off to the side are irrelevant. And so we still are kind of in this phase with Billy Napier where the talk has been a lot louder than the actions. I think another loss could certainly be quite damning for his tenure. And I wouldn't weigh out, the possibility that if they do lose to Kentucky at home, it would make it third straight loss to the Wildcats. And off the top of my head, I think it would be the first time that a Florida coach individually has lost 3 straight times to Kentucky since like the 1940s, if not earlier. I could see him losing his job subsequently. Yes.
Yeah, the majority of the fan base has not experienced even one loss to Kentucky until recently here. This was a program that won 31 consecutive games against the Wildcats. And while certainly I think you can make the argument that Kentucky is trending upward, they have the longest tenured head coach in the SEC. This is just a game that, especially this year, isn't one that Florida should lose very often. At least they should be more competitive than they were the first 2 years. They had a lead in that 2022 contest. Last year, they lose by 19 up in Lexington. And this is a Kentucky offense, especially that while they have a former 5-star quarterback in Brock Vandegrift, their defense is banged up. They're without Maxwell Hairston, who was considered to be one of the top defensive backs in all of college football heading into the year. Their offense has been very subpar. They rank number 115 in the country in total offense here. So a very winnable contest for Florida. They shouldn't have to be in a shootout. And if coaching mistakes rear their ugly heads once again, I think that the calls are going to be quite deafening for Florida to part ways with Billy Napier. So we will obviously be following it all over at Swamp247, and we'll have some preview content heading into tomorrow night's. We're recording this here at Friday, right around noon, before tomorrow night's matchup against the Wildcats at 7:45 p.m. in the Swamp. So make sure you check out Swamp247 for all of our coverage. And before we get out of here, let me just say, if you're frustrated, apathetic, whatever you want to call it, about the Florida football program, don't go anywhere, because we have a ton of basketball content coming very soon here. The Florida men's basketball program entered the preseason AP Top 25 for the first time since 2019, checking in at number 21. They have an exciting roster, getting Walter Clayton, Will Richard back, adding guys like Ruben Chinyelu, Elijah Martin, Sam Alexis, Alex Condon, and Thomas Haw coming back for their sophomore seasons. So very exciting time. And Jacob has a ton of fall ball coverage for baseball as well. It's a really exciting time here for Florida fans if they are not invested heavily in the football program right now. And frankly, can't blame them very much for that. So make sure you stay tuned to Swamp247. We'll have a ton of content coming. Like I said, Blake Alderman does a fantastic job covering all things recruiting. But for now, that's going to do it for us here at the Swamp247 podcast. For Jacob Rudner, I'm Graham Hall, and we'll see you next time.